as a reminder, we're recording now for the presentation, and we'll turn that off when we get to the question and answer session, just to try to make you feel as comfortable as possible asking questions that you think might be naive and not have them recorded in perpetuity. So I'm so excited to hear from Dr. Sarah Seabrook today. She's joining us from the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, or NIWA, in New Zealand, sharing, and so it's very early in the morning for her. Thank you so much, Sarah, for getting up to give this presentation to us. And she's going to be sharing her perspectives on the deep ocean and climate negotiations and ocean carbon dioxide removal strategies, from her experience of participating in some of these recent global meetings. So I will hand it over, stop sharing, so that we can hear from Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rosalind, is that working okay?
Looks great.
Great, thank you. All right. So before I kind of dig into it, I just want to kind of summarize how I got involved in this space. I'm coming into this as an ocean scientist, and so the policy space was a bit external to what I was involved in day to day, but I think that climate change has really become front and center in our thoughts and in our science and the headlines that we see in the news. And as particularly in the science I was doing, I kept seeing the impacts of climate change, or the forecasts of what climate change may do, interacting with the systems I was studying. I really felt compelled to find a way to interact with the policy space, to work to communicate the science I was seeing to policymakers who could perhaps integrate it into policy formation. And these past few years, I've been able to get involved with this a bit more through particularly the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, where I help to co-lead the climate working group. And within that, we do activities where we can coordinate and create press releases or publications. We attend events such as last year's COP27 and this year's UN Climate Conference to work to communicate the deep sea science to the policy climate space. And what I will talk with you about today is really what I've learned in this process. It's a huge space, and I'm still really learning the language within the arena and how everything works. So this will just be my take on it all so far and what I've observed in being able to participate in these activities. And it can be a frustrating space at times, but it's also a really rewarding one. And if you're interested in joining at all, you can reach out to me, of course, at any time. And I'd be happy to dig into certain aspects a bit more in the question section. To go through this and kind of break down the deep sea and climate interactions, and I'll start just with some of the science and some of the interactions between the deep sea and climate change. I'll give a brief history of the UNFCCC, including what that is, and the ocean. I'll talk about these lessons that I've learned, observations I've made, and I'll try to highlight a couple priority areas that I think are potential spaces for next steps or opportunities from what I've seen so far. And this is, again, just a brief summary of a really, really big space. So just to start out, the ocean is our greatest climate regulator, and that's why we're here talking about the ocean and climate interaction. It's taken in 90% of the heat and about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide related to human emissions. But in doing this, there's been a complex set of feedback processes that have started. And so this is from the IPCC. And it's really showing those interactions and feedbacks that happen across the Earth system, from increasing CO2 emission, the warming that's related to that. And you see these impacts in the ocean, in the cryosphere, and on land. And these feedbacks in the ocean space are really pushing the ocean towards potentially catastrophic tipping points. The CO2 that the ocean has taken in, the heat that the ocean has taken in, it's led to multifaceted cumulative impacts that are occurring across ocean depths. And in this figure here by Levin and Labrie 2015, you can see some of these impacts plotted all together, coexisting with direct interactions that we have with the ocean system, from fishing and oil and gas, mining, pollution. And as we look at these cumulative impacts across the ocean space, it's really important and interesting to consider what this means for the deep sea, which is most of the ocean. If we think about just ocean warming, the ocean is becoming warmer every year globally, and this is happening across ocean depths. You can see here in this plot that this is going all the way down to 2,000 meters, and you can see these patches of warming happening not just at the surface, but all the way through ocean depths. This is projected to continue increasing over time. This warming has direct impacts on deep sea life, and it also increases ocean stratification, which is the layering within the ocean. And this disturbs ocean biogeochemistry and impacts food transport. And this figure here, you don't really have to see everything that's happening within it, but it's just showing what's called the biological pump, where carbon comes into the ocean, it's used by life within the ocean, and eventually sinks and is buried within the deep sea. But all of these processes are sensitive to warming and changes to the stratification within the ocean. If we think about the reductions in food transport that could be related to this, from warming, there's these predicted decreases in surface production, which would lead to less food delivery to the deep sea. This has been projected to potentially lead to less deep sea animals. In this plot here, we're looking at a high emission scenario and projected out to 2100. And it's indicating that due to decreases in surface production, there could be 10% less animals in the deep sea by 2100. And it also shifts sediment biogeochemistry, which we'll see in a bit. The shifting biogeochemistry in the ocean can also is related to this process called ocean deoxygenation. In general, warm water, it holds less oxygen. And so from the impacts of warming itself, oxygen minimum zones are expanding around the world, but also changes to ocean stratification are reducing circulation between different parts of the ocean water column, contributing to deoxygenation as well. Since 1960, 2% global average loss in the ocean oxygen levels have been measured, and there's been up to 40% loss in some ocean regions. I think it's interesting to compare this to what is experienced at the top of Mount Everest. There's about 30% less oxygen on top of Mount Everest. And when we humans go up there, we need masks to be able to breathe. And so if you think about what's happening for life in the ocean, and particularly these areas that are having extreme oxygen loss, it really just means that these animals are not able to survive in certain low oxygen conditions. And this is really called and considered the suffocation of the ocean in some spaces. So it's a really important problem that a lot of research is contributing to. You also have ocean acidification. So the carbon dioxide that the ocean has taken in, which has helped to mitigate the impacts of climate change, it has also decreased the ocean pH and alkalinity, which causes ocean acidification. And you can see this from 1985 to today, this steady decrease in ocean pH. And this is related to the ocean uptake in carbon primarily. This ocean acidification, it changes the range in which animals can live. It impacts the survivability of larvae across ocean depths, and it can degrade the structural basis of some deep sea ecosystems. So it has a broad range of impacts as well. And as this is COBRA, I also wanted to talk about the seafloor impacts. And so this figure here from Bianchi et al. 2021 is comparing baseline scenarios of carbon and nutrient cycling within the sediment to future scenarios based on certain stressors. So, for example, with warming, there could be an increased methane flux from sediments, from decreased flux of organic carbon or food, as we were talking about. This can impact the quantity and flux of food making it to the deep sea, changing the benthic community, changing food energy transfer. From hypoxia, this process of deoxygenation, you can have changing benthic pelagic coupling, so it's coupling between the ocean and the sediment, and it can also change the zones of oxygenated sediment. It can change the amount of bioturbation that certain animals have going into the seafloor. Acidification can impact the food quality that's making it down to the sediment, but also the amount through changing particle ballasting. And acidification and hypoxia together, we can see changes in nutrient cycling, changes in the burial of particular organic carbon. And so you see there's a lot of impacts just even in the sediment space related to these climate stressors that we are talking about. And when we think about all of these impacts in the deep ocean space particularly, and we think about what we can do, the first really clear thing is really just reducing emissions. And so this is from the IPCC, and it's their low emission and high emission scenarios considered for marine heat wave days, ocean pH, ocean oxygen, and ocean heat content. And I include this just because it's really obvious when you look at a figure like this, at every low emission scenario, the impacts are less. If we are able to reduce emissions, we have less heat wave days. The ocean heat content is not as bad. The ocean pH does not drop as low, and the ocean oxygen doesn't drop as low. So first thing that's really important is reducing emissions. We also need to let the ocean recover so it can do what it does best, which is regulate our climate. And we can help the ocean to regulate our climate, but with caution and research. And we'll talk about that as it relates particularly to ocean carbon dioxide removal. But these are global problems that need global policy, and that's where this international climate negotiation space really comes in. And historically, this has been a tale of two regimes, as called by this pretty interesting paper, if you're interested in digging into it more, Bodansky et al. 2021, where you've had climate change law and you've had ocean law, and they haven't had much interaction. If we consider ocean law, for example, the Law of the Sea Convention, which is the big governing mechanism within the ocean space, historically, it was adopted before climate change became a significant international issue, and it doesn't have mention to climate change within the original text. And there's many specialized independent treaty regimes that are dealing with things like fisheries, ocean dumping, and these other things. Whereas in the climate change space, the basic instruments of the UN climate change regime, they contain very few references to the ocean, which we'll dig into more. And they're largely focused on the causes and consequences of climate change for the atmosphere, terrestrial systems, and economy. But we know, and we've seen from what I've just shown, that climate change is directly interacting and impacting the ocean. And it also, that the ocean is a space that can help mitigate in some ways climate change. So there is a linkage there. And one of the things we've been really working on is trying to continue creating those linkages. To understand this more, we need to understand what the UN climate change space is. So this is really centered around the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as the UNFCCC. This was adopted in UN headquarters in 1992 and entered into force in 1994. It has near universal membership, 198 parties, with the parties being state actors. The early years focused on international climate negotiations, and now it supports many bodies that serve to advance implementation of the convention as well. These are things like the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, which you may have heard of. And it supports 2 to 4 negotiation sessions a year, including the UN Climate Conference, which happened just this past June, and the Conference of the Parties, the next one of which is COP28, and that'll be in November in United Arab Emirates. Participation in the UNFCCC is split into parties and non-parties, really. So your parties are your participating states, these 198 about countries you can think of, which are accredited within the UNFCCC framework, and then non-parties, which are observer states and organizations, which can participate by informing the process, but they don't have voting rights or decision negotiation privileges. To be a non-party, you have to complete an admission process to be an official observer. And that's how I've been able to participate in these processes is through an admitted organization where I'm able to attend through. Science within the UNFCCC, all action under the UNFCCC process, it's based on the best available science, and it enters the process through many streams, including the research and systematic observation group, which has many different subgroups that kind of work to review and coordinate the incorporation of science. They do periodic reviews, trying to see, based on the science, how they are getting along and meeting certain goals, like trying to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they cooperate with the IPCC, which is the scientific body that produces the big IPCC reports, trying to investigate the impacts of climate change and projections forward for different climate scenarios. The ocean in the UNFCCC, as I mentioned, it has been, the ocean has been historically largely neglected in international climate talks and climate policies. The adopted text from 1992, it mentions the ocean really only once, and it's in an article where it says parties should promote the sustainable management and cooperation in the conservation as appropriate of sinks and reservoirs of all greenhouse gases, including the ocean. The Kyoto Protocol didn't mention the ocean at all. The Paris Agreement from 2015 was one of the first real big UNFCCC documents to mention the ocean, and it mentions it in the preamble, the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including the ocean. Interestingly, the Paris Agreement called for these nationally determined contributions by parties about what they found to be high priority things within the climate space. And interestingly, 70% of those, though, included ocean and marine issues. And so it does show that by the different country state actors, there is this interest and involvement with the ocean. And this really started motivating a more concrete alignment within the ocean climate biodiversity nexus. There started to be an increased interest in integrating the ocean into climate negotiations, really since the Paris Agreement in 2015. And so this is just kind of some examples of this. We don't have to go through all of them, but following this, we saw an IPCC special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. There were ocean action days, launch of a roadmap to oceans and climate action. COP25 was labeled the Blue COP by the Chilean presidency. Ocean themes were discussed during the Nairobi Work Program. And one of the really cool things I've been able to be involved with is the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue. This became a mandated event last year at COP27, and I participated in it this past June. And this is the first UNFCCC-wide opportunity for parties and non-parties to weigh in consideration of ocean-related issues in climate negotiations. So this increased interest and alignment in integrating the ocean into climate negotiations is really awesome. However, the ocean, it still is underrepresented in climate policy. For example, one of the things that we heard at the UN Climate Conference last month is this year is the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. So within the Paris Agreement, they asked for a 5-year assessment of progress that was mandated within the Paris Agreement. And they released the first 2 technical dialogues for the global stocktake earlier this year. Both of them are about 200 pages in length each, but the ocean is just mentioned 23 times across all of those. And so there's still a lot of space for us to continue trying to communicate the importance of the ocean to these processes. And I really want to note too, particularly in relation to what we're talking about here, that when the ocean is included, the deep ocean is often missing from that conversation. And as we were talking about in kind of the impact session, the deep ocean is about 90% of the ocean. And so it's a really important part to consider. And we will talk about kind of the observations and lessons learned and related to having a deep sea mindset being at these negotiations. I have just some general observations, which I won't dig into so much, but these are just kind of interesting general observations that I made participating in these events. And during the question session, I'm happy to dig into any of these a bit more. But there is really interesting dialogue that you can observe and interact with in relation to just what different countries are struggling with in terms of the climate space, to what is brought up as critical issues. For example, at the UN Climate Conference, they would make these cool visualizations of summarizing certain sessions. And this one is summarizing points that India had raised during sessions about unsustainable consumption, really just trying to talk about how particularly the developed world outsources a lot of the manufacturing that it wants done to these developing countries, and it does so to support this unsustainable consumption. And it's that consumption that has opportunities to be regulated to reduce emissions. There's also conversations about greenhouse gas accounting, so this difference between the country that the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from versus who the end user or owner of the industry that's making the greenhouse gases is. There's lots of conversations about loss and damages. So for developing nations who are most impacted by climate change right now, what sort of mechanisms exist to help them cope with the damages and losses associated with climate impacts. And then there's disconnects that I've just been noticing between what needs to happen when individual countries and will kind of agree to do. And it's interesting from the science space to be able to observe these things because it helps provide a deeper understanding of the priority points that are being featured within the climate negotiations, but also to start thinking from your own science that you're doing, what opportunities exist to link in and to contribute to certain priority items. Thinking about the deep ocean and climate policy specifically, the deep ocean is both part of the climate solution and also sensitive to topics within the UNFCCC framework, particularly emissions reductions and mitigation options, which we've highlighted and gone through. There's been increasing mention of the ocean within the UNFCCC proceedings, and this is largely dominated, I would say, by use-based actions, particularly things like ocean carbon dioxide removal. And I highlighted that within the title of this talk because of that reason. It's something that is becoming discussed a lot at the UN level. And so I wanted to dig into it just briefly. So ocean carbon dioxide removal is these negative emission technologies. It's thinking about ways in which we can use the ocean to trap more carbon, basically. And so you have things like ocean alkalinization, iron fertilization, you have macroalgal biomass cultivation, artificial upwelling or downwelling, the dumping of terrestrial biomass, direct CO2 removal or deposition on or in the seafloor. So you have a lot of these different mechanisms that could potentially trap carbon a little bit more. And this is becoming a big part of the conversation within the UNFCCC space, particularly because within the IPCC projections of the lower emission scenarios, it includes mitigation within that. So for us to reach certain low emission standards, they have it not just happening through pure emissions reductions, but emissions reductions coupled to mitigation options. So we are in this point where mitigation is an important part of the story, but which mitigation options we use is something that is really important to discuss and consider. And one of the things that we have been talking about and working on in this space is just trying to really highlight and understand the potential impacts of ocean carbon dioxide removal on certain ocean ecosystems, particularly within the deep sea. And so if we take these certain proposed ocean climate intervention methods, and this is a figure summarized from this Levin et al. Paper, which you could see for more information. We can see, for example, biogeochemical changes, alterations to food supply, light changes, and animal responses that could happen with these proposed climate intervention methods. So you can have direct CO2 injection into the seafloor and deposition on the seafloor, leading to low oxygen conditions or animal mortality. The deposition of crop waste, for example, could lead to seafloor smothering, which could in some cases lead to enhanced greenhouse gas release. If you think about alkalinity addition, it can change the light penetration into the ocean, as well as release potential trace metals. You can have ocean fertilization, also impacting light penetration, but also changing oxygen concentrations and acidification in the ocean. And so you have these multitude of impacts, and you can see really that they are compounding it upon what's already happening due to climate change in the ocean. In many cases, you have acidification, deoxygenation, you have changes to food supply, you have impacts to ocean life, and you have this interaction with different forms of greenhouse gas release. And so one of the things that we're working on is really trying to motivate the research into potential impacts of these certain mitigation options, these certain ocean climate intervention methods, to ensure that whatever does take place doesn't cause more harm, doesn't cause more emissions, but can happen in a way that that can help ensure a sustainable future and a sustainable ocean moving forward. So just to kind of summarize this, if we think about these ocean-based actions, particularly ocean carbon dioxide removal, there are important science gaps that exist for us to be able to develop truly effective climate mitigation strategies. So there's gaps in understanding of the natural ocean carbon cycle, such as how much carbon would be trapped throughout the life of sequestration, and what would the broader impacts be. And so these are really high priority research areas. And one of the things that we suggested at the most recent UN climate conference was perhaps this is something that could, say, be investigated in a special IPCC report or something like this, where a big research group could come together and really try to look across the whole lifespan of the carbon sequestration, what the amount of carbon that could be trapped actually is, and what the impacts are that are associated, so that we can go into this as smart and well prepared as possible. Also, in addition to ocean carbon dioxide removal, I just thought I'd highlight at COP27, there was also deep sea mining. And this was interesting because at COP27, it did actually mean that the deep sea was talked about a little bit more in some situations. And this was really started off in the beginning of COP27 when Macron, president of France, called for a ban in deep sea mining in relation to the COP27 conference. And so a lot of people were talking about it. It was really quite interesting. And there was also this premiere of this documentary. And this was really talked about because the minerals that are sought after in deep sea mining can help make batteries and renewable energy products. And so it was a topic of discussion at COP27, which is how do we get these? And you did see countries talking about the potential impact to the deep sea in relation to that, including France, which was interesting to observe. In addition to this use-based increasing mention of the ocean within the UNFCCC proceedings, there's been a somewhat broader recognition of the potential benefits of mainstreaming aspects of the climate, ocean, and biodiversity policies. And so this kind of two-regime system, which is kind of a three-regime system if you bring the biodiversity nexus into it, they operate quite independently, but they're all related, and particularly, climate change interacts across all of them. And so are there mechanisms in these policies to allow more coordinated action? And one potential opportunity for that, which we have discussed, is potentially through the high sea treaties is there opportunities, which is this treaty looking at biodiversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction, which was just adopted last month and is in the process of trying to get approval to come into force. Is this treaty a potential mechanism for trying to link across this space? And that's kind of an interesting thought to consider. But with all of these ways in which I've noticed that the deep sea does come into the conversation, the deep ocean is really still largely siloed from climate policy. And an important aspect that I want to highlight from that is even just at this last month's ocean dialogue, which was this event mandated by the UNFCCC, as I mentioned, where it was this opportunity for ocean themes to really be discussed within the climate level. The deep sea and high seas were largely missing. The two topics that were picked for the ocean dialogue were coastal ecosystem restoration, including blue carbon, and fisheries and food security. And these topics, they do intersect with the deep sea space and with the high sea space, but they were not highlighted within the conversations there. And so within this dialogue, we also worked to try to communicate the importance of including the deep sea and high seas in such conversations. And we'll see how this progresses throughout the years. But the importance in this really comes from also the fact that the results of the ocean and climate change dialogue, they get communicated to COP28 later this year. So when you can find opportunities to help input comments or dialogue into these events, those then could get communicated later on to a follow-on proceeding of the UNFCCC and perhaps be able to influence future decisions. I wanted to discuss sort of why the deep ocean and high seas are perhaps siloed from climate policy and from these different mechanisms. And I think, the first one is the classic one that a lot of us are familiar with, which is that it's somewhat out of sight and out of mind for a lot of people. And there's a slow recognition of the interconnectedness of the ocean, that it is one ocean. In the ocean dialogue topics, you saw the focus on the coastal space and on fisheries and food security. But what happens in the coastal zone, it interacts with what's happening in the high seas, in the deep sea, and the rest of the ocean. 64% of the ocean is high seas, 90% of the ocean is deep sea. This is a really large portion of the ocean. It's really important for all the climate mitigation opportunities that have happened, but it also has a lot of interaction with what's happening in the coastal spaces that states are more concerned with. And so trying to promote the knowledge of that interconnectedness. There's also been limited observations in the deep sea, and there's that question of who governs the deep sea or the high seas, which countries speak for it in climate negotiations. If we think about these first two reasons why it's somewhat siloed from climate policy historically, I think that interacting with the UNFCCC as a scientist, I can give the opportunity to share knowledge about the intrinsic links of the deep sea and high seas with ongoing climate change, and opportunities to highlight what science today indicates maybe potential risks of policy action. So this is one potential solution and opportunity here, I think, to help with this disconnect between the deep sea and high seas and climate policy and the ocean space that's happening within the UNFCCC, is just really sharing this knowledge about the links. The limited observations in the deep sea, limiting incorporation of deep ocean and high seas and climate policy. Some of this, and this is one thing that I have noticed from the conversations I've had at these events, is that most of what the policymakers are taking to influence their decisions is coming from the high confidence reports within IPCC. So it's coming from, they're taking in the policy summaries from the IPCC reports, the high confidence findings. But within the deep sea or high seas, there's in many of these systems, there's not enough observations to reach the high confidence mark. And so there's many things that fall off the agenda due to that. But there's opportunities here, either from leveraging the ocean decade, as is already happening, or interacting with party delegations to build on observations, to share data that parties may not otherwise be aware of, and highlight research priorities. So for example, by being at these negotiations, while as an observer, you don't have an opportunity or an ability to directly influence anything, you can network with and talk with party delegations, telling them about what the science is indicating in certain areas that they might not be aware of just from what the high confidence IPCC values are, or just from what they are learning from their colleagues. And so then you can help to shape the decisions that come out from the science in these spaces. This issue of who governs the deep sea, what countries speak for the climate negotiations. The interesting thing about the UNFCCC is it's built around parties or states. So who speaks for the high seas, these areas outside of national jurisdiction, including large parts of the deep sea. The one potential opportunity here could be a climate-focused high seas commission, or just some body that really is centered upon speaking for the high seas. And enhanced communication of the interconnectedness of the ocean and earth system could help with this as well, for parties to recognize the interaction between their waters, their land, and these deep sea and high seas environments. And just quickly summarizing all of this, for some priorities and opportunities that could exist, ocean carbon dioxide removal has urgent science needs that have to be met as it gains political interest. And so within this COBRA group, there's sediment carbon burial research needs that are possible. There's unique opportunities to work across the ocean climate biodiversity nexus to work towards the mainstreaming of policies. Is the High Seas Treaty a potential opportunity for this? Can research and observation needs in the deep sea or high sea systems work to better inform policy development? And can we work directly with country delegates to provide pipelines for scientific information sharing? Other opportunities for this are policy briefs and enhanced communications or networking. I just want to highlight, that we as scientists, the science we create, we can make differences and inform climate policies. And across any realm that you exist in, scientists, you have opportunities to make a difference and inform these policies. I think it's really important for us to do this as the unabated greenhouse gas emissions continue. There's many big UNFCCC events that you can participate in, but there's also opportunities to contribute from your home or from your computer. And these are just kind of opportunities of different policy briefs, articles, outputs that can be produced working along with economists, policymakers, scientists to produce these outputs. And I'll leave it there now. If you have any further questions outside of what we get to here, or if you're interested in getting involved in any way, just please email me and reach out, and I'd be happy to chat more about it. Thank you.